You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and there's a lot of football to get to along with the Greg Enright interview, so I'm not going to waste any time. Let's get right into football, specifically a report by Michael Lombardi of The Ringer, who said that Quan Alexander, Dee Ford, Marquise Goodwin, and Jaquiski Tartt, all of the San Francisco 49ers, are on the trade block. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack there, so I'll go one by one, starting with Quan Alexander. I've never been a big Quan Alexander fan. Always thought he was overrated. I remember when the Niners gave him that big contract to lure him from Tampa Bay. Never thought he was that good. He had a couple decent seasons in Tampa, but was never great and was signed to an insanely big contract. I mean, one that just made you scratch your head when you looked at it. 4 years, $54 million. That's $13.5 million a year. On no planet is Quan Alexander worth that. Yeah, the Niners should trade him. I don't think there's a question about that. The guy got hurt in Week 9, missed the rest of the season. I think he came back for the postseason. Yeah, he came back for the postseason, didn't do anything. Yeah, terrible signing. The Niners should get rid of him. Yeah, I don't think there's a question about that. If they designate him as a post-June 1st cut, they can save $475,000. So not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. But it may be worth it at this point. He has been so bad for them, and any little bit helps with the Niners. They only have $13 million in cap space, and obviously that number is going to go up in a week because they're going to have some new players on the roster with the draft. They're going to need to save as much money as they can. Quan Alexander, I'd be stunned if he was a Niner Week 1. I would just cut my losses with him. To trade him would be a borderline miracle for John Lynch. Although, he's worked miracles before. Dee Ford is the interesting one on this list. This is a guy who just 13 months ago, Lynch traded a second rounder for. Now, that was after he had a 15-sack season and an 88.5 overall grade from Pro Football Focus. Dominant player. No one begrudged that trade at the time for the Niners. Now, granted, Ford did not have a really good year for the Niners. He only played 226 snaps for him. The thing is, though, in those snaps, he had an 84.4 overall grade and 7 sacks. Yeah, the injury bug bit him last year. But you have to trust that he won't get bitten by it again. unless you can get a higher pick than what you gave up to get him, yeah, you have to keep him. And that's not a bad thing. This guy is insanely dominant. I'll take him on the Jets. They need an edge rusher. I'll take D Ford right now. I don't care that it can't work with the salary cap as currently constructed. You know what? Make moves if you Joe Douglas to clear cap space. That's how great D Ford is. I think he's going to stay with the Niners. Here's hoping that he doesn't get bit by the injury bug again. If he doesn't, then he will be worth the second-round pick that Lynch gave up for him. If he gets bit by it again, the Niners can cut him next year and save $12.8 million. Marquise Goodwin has been rumored to be on the trade block for a long time. In fact, Lynch basically confirmed it yesterday. For whatever it's worth, he denied that Alexander, Ford, and Tart are on the trade block, but it's still worth talking about the possibility of them being traded. Goodwin, he basically confirmed that, yeah, he is on the trade block. This is a guy who only caught 12 passes last year and is set to count for just under $5 million on their salary cap. Yeah, the Niners can save the money. And they have a bunch of wide receivers anyway on their roster. Deebo Samuel, Kendrick Bourne, Dante Pettis has talent. See, here's the thing with Kyle Shanahan that I don't like about him. And his father did this too. He just turns on players on a dime. Like, think about it this way. The Niners running back situation. That was unsettled all year. Shanahan couldn't pick one. Dante Pettis was supposed to have a big year last year. He didn't. Who were the only consistent players in that Niners offense? Jimmy Garoppolo and George Kittle. That's it. Shanahan mixed and matched, and it wasn't until he traded for Emmanuel Sanders, or Lynch traded for Emmanuel Sanders, whatever, that he found a third guy. Goodwin should have been used more by the Niners. I don't think there's a question about that. Now, Goodwin isn't a particularly great receiver. Truth be told, I don't really like him that much. He had one good year in 2017 on a garbage Niners team that went 6-10. And then he parlayed it into a huge contract. I give him credit for that. He's making as much money as he can. Nothing wrong with that. He shouldn't have been given that contract. 3 years, 18.85? No way. Or at the very least, if you're going to give him that contract, feed him the ball. After he was given that contract, he only caught 35 passes. To put that in perspective, his breakout year, he caught 56. Should Goodwin be traded? The answer is yes. There are teams out there that need wide receivers that could take the chance on him. I forgot the team that I had Henry Ruggs going to in my mock draft with Nick. I could actually look right now. Let's see if I can find it really fast. Had him going 17, so that was to the Cowboys to play with Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. Goodwin would make sense there. The Chiefs may be looking for another wide receiver. I've heard them linked to Henry Ruggs. Maybe Goodwin joins the Chiefs, although I don't know how that would work with him being 5'9" and Tyreek Hill being 5'10". You don't want two short wide receivers out there. The big corners will feast on him. Is it worth trading for Goodwin? You can make the argument for it, but I've said this a billion times. This is a stacked wide receiver draft class. Just draft a wide receiver and you'll be fine. The Niners will be forced to cut Goodwin. You can sign him for a very cheap rate as opposed to having to give up a pick for him. I think that's what's most likely to happen if Goodwin is on a new team next year. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he was cut. But the biggest thing here is that Kyle Shanahan needs to have a set group of guys in his offense that he features. It can't just be Garoppolo and Kittle. He's going to have to trust Deebo Samuel. He's going to have to trust Kendrick Bourne. He may even have to trust Dante Pettis. It's okay if he wants to add more wide receivers in the draft. I have no problem with that. But don't have them ride the bench all year. Feature them in your offense. Running back too, I'd like him to pick a bell cow back. Obviously, injuries play a role in that too, but just pick a group of guys, Shanahan, and stick with them. The Shanahan family always does that. It's what ticks me off about him. Jaquiski Tartt is the last guy who Lombardi mentioned could be on the trade block. And I really like Tartt. Always liked him. Even coming out of Samford, I remember thinking that he could be the steal of that draft. I was kind of surprised he was taken in the second round. Show of hands, how many people know where Samford is? Admittedly, I had to look it up. I'm sure I knew it in 2015 when he was drafted, but I had to give myself a refresher. It's in Alabama. Admittedly, I did not know that. It took Tartt a couple seasons to really get going in this league, which is to be expected coming out of a small school. It's very rare that you can find a Carson Wentz who's going to hit the ground running from a small school. And from 2017 on, he has been one of the better safeties in the league. Definitely one of the most underrated. The thing with Tartt is he's never played more than 720 snaps in a season. The injury bug has always bitten him. But when healthy, he's been a really good player in this league. Even in the playoffs, he was okay. He wasn't great. According to Pro Football Focus, he only had a 59.4 overall grade, although that's skewed because he did not have a good game against the Packers. Had a really good game against the Vikings. Was okay in the Super Bowl. For whatever it's worth, Alexander, Ford, and Goodwin were non-existent in the playoffs. Goodwin didn't even play in the playoffs. Alexander and Ford played. They weren't good. Goodwin didn't play at all. Tartt played, and in 2 of their 3 games, he was really good. If I was another team, I would give up a third-round pick for Tartt easy. He's that talented. He's young. He's only 28 years old. That's not old in this league. Not at all. You've got 4 or 5 good years left in him. If I needed a safety, I could do a lot worse than trading for Jaquiski Tartt if I was another GM. Moving over now to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I'll get to Yannick Ngakoue in a minute. I just want to touch on Marquise Lee briefly. The Jaguars obviously cut him, and it's kind of a shame how his career went. Picked kind of high in the 2014 draft, 39th overall. Some people had him as a first-round talent in that draft. I don't remember exactly where I had him, but it took him a while to get going. But then when Blake Bortles hit his stride, yeah, that's right, Blake Bortles had his stride. 2016, threw for 3,905 yards and 23 touchdowns. That's not bad. I'll take that. It's not great, but it's not bad, especially when you factor in the completion percentage and the interceptions. It's not particularly great, but again, passable. Lee had a really good year in 2016. In 2017, their playoff year, where they came very close to beating the Patriots. Let's not forget that. Lee played well. 56 catches for 702 yards. Then he got hurt in 2018, and last year he only played in 6 games and caught 3 passes. Yeah, that guy is going to be cut. It's a shame. Lee had a ton of talent, was bitten by the injury bug. It's not a bad idea to bring him in. I've heard teams like the Bears, Vikings, Eagles, Chiefs, and Cowboys linked to him. If the Niners move on from Goodwin, they could bring in Marquise Lee. That would make a ton of sense. Lee is better than Goodwin. No question about that in my mind. Sign him to a 1-year deal, veterans minimum, and you'll be fine. He's either going to stay healthy or he won't. If he stays healthy, you've got a really good wide receiver. If not, alright, you're not out a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. Okay, on to the fun stuff. Yannick Ngakoue. We all saw the tweets that he sent to Tony Khan, a co-owner of the team, and just happens to be Shahid Khan's son. Shahid Khan is obviously the principal owner of the Jaguars. And, hey, give Tony Khan credit. He's no shrinking violet. I give Tony Khan a ton of credit for not taking crap from anyone, especially one of his players who wants to be traded. No, you do not have to take that from him. You want to tell me you have to take it from your father and other people who you deal with in business, whether it's with the Jaguars or the soccer team that you own, Fulham FC, or All Elite Wrestling. Yeah, okay, fine, I get that. But you don't take that from a player that wants out. I give Tony Khan a ton of credit. I'm sure there were a bunch of Jaguars fans, probably the majority of them, that wanted this situation to be resolved. How many times have we seen players posture after getting the franchise tag and eventually they either sign it or sign a long-term deal? Yeah, there's a Le'Veon Bell situation on occasion, or a D Ford situation where the guy gets traded, but usually it works itself out. Now, forget about it. That situation is unsalvageable. Yannick Ngakoue cannot be a Jacksonville Jaguar next year. He can't even be an unsigned franchise tagged guy. They have to trade him now. You want to tell me you're not going to get a lot for him now if you're the Jaguars? Hey, I understand that, but you still need to have a sense of pride in your organization. You can't keep this guy around. What's to stop him from doing this again? You're already cleaning house anyway. I feel sorry for Jaguars fans. I really do. Not that long ago, you had a ton of potential. You had a quarterback that I really liked in Bortles, great young running back in Leonard Fournette, a fantastic defense, came one quarter away from beating the New England Patriots in the AFC title game, this has been a collapse of epic proportions. And it's going to take them a long time to come back from this. This may sound cheesy, but it's the truth. The best thing they can do is establish a sense of culture and get rid of the people that don't want to be there. If you're Shahid Khan, Tony Khan, Dave Caldwell, Doug Marrone, whoever, you have to say to Ngakoue, Yannick, if you don't want to be here, fine. We just traded you. Have fun elsewhere. Now, don't cut your nose to spite your face. If the best offer you get is a 7th round pick, no. Don't do that. Ngakoue is worth at least a second. If D Ford can get a second, Ngakoue can get a second. This guy is a sack machine. He's never had less than 8 sacks in a season. In fact, if you look at his Pro Football Focus grade, when he had a 52.2 overall grade, I don't know how on earth he got that grade. I was watching him his rookie year. He was my pick for Defensive Rookie of the Year that year. After the season, he had 8 sacks. 8 sacks in a 52.2 overall graded season. I don't know how that's possible. Ngakoue should have gotten a much higher grade. After that, he's never had a grade lower than 72. He's been a wrecking ball in this league. Yeah, he can get a second. And a team should give him a huge contract. I don't know what exactly it would be, but if you want to make him one of the highest paid defensive players in the league, you certainly can. I wouldn't fault you for that in the slightest. He should get at least 15 mil. At least. There is one particular group of fans that's really excited about this. And that's the New York Jets. Look, I've been screaming about it for months. That they need an edge rusher. Jadeveon Clowney is still on the market. Let's assume they don't have the cap space for him. Yeah, they can make cap space, but just for whatever reason, let's just say that the Jets don't want him. I don't know why, but it's clear they don't. So, Clowney's not going to be a Jet. Ngakoue's kind of interesting. This is a guy who a bunch of Jets fans were screaming for even before free agency. Now they see this circus, and they want their team to pounce. I don't blame them. There's a part of me that wants to say to Joe Douglas, batten down the hatches and trade a big pick for this guy. Let's go. He's better than any edge rusher that the Jets can get in the draft. And if they don't want to sign Jadeveon Clowney, Ngakoue's a damn good consolation prize. But you have to think to yourself, how is he going to mesh with the locker room? Make no mistake about it, this is a team that has a very fragile locker room. We all see what's happening with Jamal Adams. Le'Veon Bell and Gase had friction all throughout last year. Do you want to add another volatile player to that in Ngakoue? That's a situation that can blow up in the Jets' face. Forget just trading for him. You're going to have to sign him to a big extension. You're stuck with him for a while. Now, yeah, that's not a bad thing from an on-the-field standpoint, but chemistry does mean something. And, look, Adam Gase isn't a shrinking violet either, just like Tony Khan. Gase is no shrinking violet. I'm saying that phrase more than I've ever said it in my life today, but it's true. He doesn't take crap from anyone. Players, his coaches, his executives, the owner, whatever. The fans, the media. Him and Ngakoue will kill each other. Now, there are a bunch of Jets fans that will say Adam Gase should not stand in the way of this trade. And, look, when a talent like this becomes available and fills such a huge need, yeah, there's a part of me that agrees with that. But Gase isn't going to change for anyone. Should he? Yes. He should change his approach a little bit. Will he? No. I have no idea where Ngakoue is going to play next year. It won't be for the Jaguars. I'd be very, 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 very surprised if it was with the Jets. I'd love it. I really would. I would take the chance on it working. I understand that odds are it won't work and him and Gase will kill each other. But he fills such a huge need and he's such a fantastic talent that you have to take the chance if you're Joe Douglas. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with him. Alright, I do want to talk about a death that came to my attention as I was editing yesterday's show. And I really wanted to talk about it today. And that is the death of Mike Curtis, who died yesterday at the age of 77. From the late 60s to the mid-70s, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better linebacker than Curtis. No one kept sacks back then, but I'm telling you, this guy would have at least 30 sacks if we kept count. At least. Probably more. A lot more, as a matter of fact. 30 is just a conservative estimate. He was a fantastic blitzer, was a very tough player, old school player. The famous picture of him almost taking off Roman Gabriel's head is iconic. If you haven't seen that picture, look it up. He was originally drafted as a fullback, but he was switched to linebacker very early on in his career, and boy howdy, did it pay off. It took him a while to really get going. From 65 to 67, he was drafted in 65. In those 3 years, he kind of floundered, looked like he was going to flame out of the league, but then in 68, something clicked. Curtis was insane that year. Had 3 fumble recoveries, 2 interceptions, returned 1 for a touchdown, 38 yards, made the Pro Bowl, made first team All-Pro, and was part of the Colts team that lost to the Jets in Super Bowl III. He did write an autobiography called Keep Off My Turf, and old school Jets fans will remember this. He killed the Jets in that book. They were lucky. The Colts were twice as good as the Jets. Yeah, he did not endear himself to Jets fans. You want to call him a sore loser? You can, but there are a lot of people that would agree with Curtis's sentiment. There's a reason that the Colts were massively favored in that game. Curtis followed it up in 69 with his second first-team All-Pro. In 1970, He had a career high in interceptions with 5. He also made his second Pro Bowl, but that's not the most important bowl that he played in. He played in Super Bowl 5 and helped the Colts beat the Cowboys by a score of 16-13. Curtis made probably the second most important play of that game. He had an interception, returned it 13 yards, and then 2 plays later, Jim O'Brien, one of the biggest one-hit wonders in NFL history, kicked the field goal that would ultimately win the game for the Colts with 9 seconds left. It is not hyperbole to say that without Mike Curtis, the Baltimore Colts do not win that Super Bowl. Pop quiz, who's the coach of that Colts team? Don McCafferty. The most forgotten coach of the most forgotten Super Bowl winning team in NFL history. And it's amazing. Not even 2 years after winning that Super Bowl, McCafferty was gone. Was fired from the Colts, went to the Lions, and then passed away in 1974. Really sad ending to his career. In 1971, Curtis made another Pro Bowl. 72 and 73. He was still good, but he wasn't great. 73, he got hurt, but was really good in those 7 games. 74, he came back and made his last Pro Bowl. It's even more impressive that he made the Pro Bowl that year because he was without Ted Hendricks. From the late 60s to mid-70s, Curtis and Hendricks formed one of the best linebacking duos in the league. But Hendricks was traded. There were some people that were concerned how Curtis would do without Hendricks' help, but Curtis didn't need any help. There's a reason that he's in the Hall of Very Good by the Professional Football Researchers Association. Was inducted in 2013. He got in on his own merits, not because of Hendricks. Ted Hendricks was a great linebacker, Hall of Famer, but don't take anything away from Mike Curtis. In 1975, his Colts career ended unceremoniously when he needed surgery to repair cartilage in his left knee. He wanted to be back in 76. The Seattle Seahawks were a new expansion team. Curtis wanted to be back. Ted Marchibroda, who was the head coach at the time, wanted Curtis back. But Joe Thomas was the GM, and Thomas couldn't stand Curtis. So he left him unprotected. Could have traded Curtis very easily. But he let him wallow in a ghastly situation in Seattle, where they only went 2-12. That really marked the end of his career. He spent a couple years with the Redskins, but wasn't that good. A terrible end to a great career. If you wanted to argue that Mike Curtis should be in the Hall of Fame, I'd listen to you. I really, really would. May he rest in peace. Alright, here's my interview with Greg Enright. You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Greg Enright, the author of the Pittsburgh Penguins, The First 25 Years. Greg, how are you?
I'm doing great, Jacob.
All right, sounds good. So, how did the Penguins franchise come into existence?
Well, the story starts in 1966, and the NHL at that time had announced that they were going to be expanding, actually doubling the size from 16 to 12, and they were accepting applications for franchise bids, and a young lawyer in Pittsburgh who was a hockey fan by the name of Peter Block decided that Pittsburgh should get one of those teams. And he, along with a state senator, Jack McGregor, who was a law school buddy of his, began putting the wheels in motion on an application to get the franchise. And they managed to enlist the support of about somewhere around 20 high rollers in Pittsburgh to put together enough money to apply for the team and pay for the franchise. And this conglomerate ended up being granted a franchise in early 1966. And from there, they started building the operation. They hired a general manager, coach, and basically built the team in time to start in the 1967-68 season as one of the 6 new expansion teams.
Yeah, and that head coach was Red Sullivan, not a particularly good head coach wherever he was, Rangers, Penguins, Capitals, wherever. So we'll skip over him. They replaced him, not a very good head coach.
No, I agree with your analysis. Yeah.
Thank you. That's okay. If we were doing the Islanders, I'd skip over Phil Goyette and Earl Ingerfield. So they replaced Red Sullivan with another guy named Red Kelly, to be specific. What can you tell us about him?
Well, Red Kelly had a huge impact on the franchise when he came aboard in the summer of 1969. He had, I believe he had just been elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame. He was a standout defenseman for a few teams in the original 6 era, most notably Detroit and Toronto. He brought to the franchise instant credibility. His track record, spoke volumes. He really, his style was not to be a yeller or an overbearing type of coach, which really most head coaches were back at that time. He was a quiet leader, but he obviously brought considerable knowledge of the game to the franchise and the team. And, the team was, it was only their 3rd year of existence. And it was really, they were trying to embark on a youth movement. So they had a lot of young players in the lineup. And he was really a steadying influence. And he just brought a touch of class to an organization that really had been doing nothing but floundering up until that point. And, the returns were immediate. They made the playoffs that first year he was behind the bench. They won their first playoff series by eliminating the Oakland Seals 4 games straight in the first round, and came within 2 wins of going to the Stanley Cup final when they lost to the Blues in the West Division final that year. So immediate impact and a great hire for the team at a time when they really needed that.
Yeah, and you brought up the youth movement that team was undergoing. There was no better young player on that team than Michel Briere. Unfortunately, his story has a sad ending. Can you lay out that absolutely tragic story?
Yeah, he was drafted by the Penguins. He didn't go, number 1 or number 2 overall. The knock on him coming out of junior in Quebec, even though he had spectacular numbers, was his size. He was a small guy, but possessed incredible speed and just skill. Could stick handle in a phone booth, and he just had an electrifying presence and a quiet confidence. So he made the team as a rookie, and during the year he was even being considered as a strong rookie of the year candidate. He put up 44 points in that first year, which today's standards maybe doesn't seem like a lot, but bear in mind the Penguins were still not a great team, and he put up really good numbers, electrified the crowd. Maybe that's the most important thing he did. He really brought helped to bring fans into the building, helped the team win. In fact, he scored the overtime winning goal in Game 4 of that Oakland series to put the Seals out and give the Penguins that series victory. So he was an instant hero to Pittsburghers. And they lost to the Blues that year. He quickly after the season ended, he went back home to his hometown in northern Quebec, and tragically got into a fatal car crash. He was actually driving, I believe it was a Mercury Cougar, 1969, that he had bought with money from his first contract with the Penguins. He was driving in the car with two of his friends. He was the only one killed. He was thrown from the car. He didn't die immediately. He was in a coma for a number of months and eventually passed away in the spring of the following year, 1971. As you say, incredibly tragic story. He had tons of potential, and as another young emerging star on the Penguins at that time told me for the book, Jean Pronovost, he potentially could have gone on to be a Hall of Famer. He had that kind of skill, and he had that kind of determination. It was all just so tragically cut short.
Yeah, no question. And if you look at his Wikipedia article, I don't know who exactly said this, but just to give the listener a sense of how dominant he was, he drew comparisons to Phil Esposito and Bobby Clark. Again, I don't know who said that, but is that a fair comparison in your opinion? Was he that dominant, or could he have been that dominant?
Absolutely. In terms of the level of dominance, I think he could have been at that level. I think the comparison to Clark is a little bit more apt just because of the size. Phil Esposito was this hulking presence in front of the net who scored a good deal of his goals just through sheer strength and, just being a bull in front of the net. And Briere wasn't that type of player. He was more along the lines of a Bobby Clark. And, of course, we know Bobby Clark had to overcome, a physical ailment in his diabetic situation. Definitely apt comparison with Clark. And, yeah, he could have gone on. Who knows? He could have been the centerpiece of some Penguin Stanley Cups long before they won Stanley Cups. Much the way Clark was the centerpiece of the Flyers' success in the mid-'70s.
Talking to Greg Enright, the author of the Pittsburgh Penguins, the first 25 years. So, would you be able to describe the career of Rick Kehoe?
I'd be happy to. Rick Kehoe started off with the Maple Leafs, and he apparently had a bit of a falling out with head coach, who just happened to be the aforementioned Greg Kelly, who had gone on to coach the Leafs after he left the Penguins. And Kehoe ended up being traded to the Penguins in 1974. He had already shown signs of being a terrific goal scorer with the Leafs, and he just kept going with the Penguins. He ended up staying until Mario Lemieux's rookie season in 1984-85. He was really a mainstay on a lot of pretty bad Penguins teams. He could always be counted on to score a lot of goals. He reached a career high in 1980-81 when he scored 55. I spoke to him for the book, and he was he's quite humble about that accomplishment. He just said everything seemed to be working that year, but really I think it was always working for Rick. It's just a matter of that year. He got a few more breaks, hit a few fewer posts, and they went in. And actually that year he won the Lady Byng Trophy as well for the most gentlemanly player in the league, which was another hallmark of his game. Just just a class act and a real shining light in those years for the Penguins when they so often struggled.
Now, when you think of the Penguins today, you think of them as the model NHL franchise, passing the torch from Lemieux to Crosby, bringing in Malkin, Marc-Andre Fleury, going from Mike Johnston to Mike Sullivan and winning back-to-back Stanley Cups. And not too many Penguins fans know that they have come very close to insolvency. Throughout their history, how close exactly have the Penguins come to bankruptcy?
Well, put it this way, in the summer of 1975, which I devote a small chapter in the book to, it warrants its own chapter, the Penguins did declare bankruptcy. And really, from the research that I did, you could tell that the franchise at one point was hanging by a thread. And at the NHL meetings that summer, the other owners could have easily pulled the plug on the franchise, which at that point had really been quite a headache to the NHL, and most notably the president of I guess he was the president, Clarence Campbell, at that time, because really the Penguins up until that point had just been had suffered through one cash poor owner after another. And it got to the point where in 1974-75, the owners basically just weren't paying the IRS tax money that they were collecting from employees. They also had taken out significant loans from banks, and they owed the NHL money. The NHL had actually run the team for a year in the early 70s. All of these circumstances combined to create an implosion just after the season in 1975. The IRS came calling. They put padlocks on the Civic Arena, and they appointed the assistant general manager at the time by the name of Jack Button to oversee the team and try to find a new owner. And they had to do so by the end of September in order to keep the franchise solvent. Jack Button is a really unsung hero in this whole story. He worked feverishly to arrange for a new owner to come in, a new ownership group, which unfortunately was another group that turned out to be quite cash poor as well. But at least they made the sale. The Penguins kept skating for the 1975-76 season, and the padlocks came off the doors, and Pittsburgh rejoiced, and they still had an NHL hockey team. But that's how close they came to just being wiped off the map. And add to this that there's just this constant threat hanging over the team of being moved to another city. There were really strong rumors, I believe it was in 1976, that the team was going to be sold to a Seattle interest and moved out there and renamed the Seattle Totems.
That's an interesting name. The Totems?
Yes.
Like a totem pole?
Yeah, exactly.
Ooh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
You know what name I've heard for the Seattle franchise? The Sockeyes, like a sockeye salmon. I like that name.
Oh. Well, I like the alliteration, yeah.
Yeah. Now, who exactly were those owners for the Penguins that were so cash poor?
Well, the original group, which was the Jack McGregor group, who I mentioned earlier.
Right.
The interesting thing about that group was that the gentlemen who made up that group, a lot of them just had absolutely no interest in running a hockey team, and they were looking to sell their interest as soon as possible. They ended up selling a majority interest to a guy named Donald Parsons right at the end of that first season. He was a big banker out of Detroit, and unfortunately, within a couple of years, his empire sort of collapsed. Loans were called in, and he basically just didn't have a lot of money to support an NHL team. And after that, the franchise was sold to a group led by a guy named Tad Potter, who also has an interesting story. He was a big Penguins fan, and he came from a rich family in Pittsburgh, had the means to be able to buy the team. He had actually worked previously as a part of a group called the Hockey Hounds, who went around Pittsburgh trying to drum up ticket sales for the Penguins in the first 2 or 3 years of the franchise. So he was a huge fan, not really much of a savvy owner or a good money manager. He, let things get a little bit somewhat like a country club around the team. There were rumors that he had bought cars for players and, just spending money, what money he had, not very frugally or smartly. And he was the owner who was in place at the time that the 1975 bankruptcy occurred. And when that occurred, when the IRS stepped in, he was just out of the picture. And Jack Button ended up arranging the sale of the team to another group, which was headed by a guy from Columbus, Ohio, named Al Seville, who was the owner of a team called, let me know if you like this name, the Columbus Owls of the
That's not bad.
National Hockey League. Yeah.
I like that better than the Blue Jackets.
Yeah. You and me both.
I mean, I have a blue jacket in my bedroom. That doesn't exactly strike fear into me. Owls, at least, they can peck your eyes out. I don't mind that.
Sure. And, they're supposed to be smart, so...
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, he was the owner of this minor league team. And, again, he just did not have deep pockets. And the Penguins had not put together a lineup that was really capable of challenging for the Stanley Cup. They had some great players. They had a lot of talent that passed through the team in the 70s, but they never had that complete lineup that would, launch them into the level of competing against the Philadelphia, Montreal, or Boston. Sometimes they. Well, of course. I
mean, you remember that team that beat you guys in '93 in the 7-game series? Thank you, David Volek.
Well, there's not only 93. There's 82 and 75.
Right. 75. Right. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Fortunately, I wasn't old enough to be following them at that time, but I do remember '82, and that was. I think that's still my biggest heartbreak as a hockey fan. But
hey, I'm an Islander fan. I've had a lot of heartbreaks, so you're in good company. Talking to Greg Enright, the author of the Pittsburgh Penguins, the first 25 years. Now, the best GM of the first 25 years of the Penguins. It may be Craig Patrick, although he wasn't around for a lot of that 25-year time. He started late 1989, so he was only around for about 4 years when you make the cutoff. The longest tenured GM was a guy by the name of Baz Bastian. He may have been the best one. What can you tell us about him? Where do you put him and Patrick in the first 25 years? I'd love to hear.
Yeah, well,
longevity means something.
Absolutely. And Baz Bastien was in a difficult spot as the general manager of the Penguins. He came on as an assistant general manager in 1976, and he, I believe it was the next year, he took over the full-time role as GM. The Penguins, they needed to attract fans in order to stay in Pittsburgh. Really, to be blunt about it. I mean, they were playing under the shadow of the Steelers and the Pirates, who were winning championships in the late '70s, mid '70s, And, the Penguins needed to win. They needed to at least make the playoffs most years to have a hope of breaking even. Baz Bastien, who was a really good hockey man, knew this. And, the path to making the playoffs a lot of the times was trading for talent that could put them over the hump, get them into that last or second last playoff spot, and, get them on the map in the Pittsburgh sports scene and generate that extra revenue for the cash-strapped owners, whoever they happened to be at the time. And so he engineered a lot of trades that involved high draft picks going out of the Penguin organization for older talent. You could even say, close to being washed-up talent. He made a lot of these types of trades, and what it did was it did succeed in getting them into the playoffs and competing, maybe even winning the odd round. But it really gutted the cupboard for future years. And with such a dearth of young talent in the organization because they had traded most of these picks away, the result was the Penguins hit rock bottom in 1982-83. They finished last overall, and they finished last overall in the next year, which of course was the year they picked the right year to finish last and drafted Mario Lemieux. Funny thing about that was that they finished last the previous year, 82-83, but had traded away their pick to the Minnesota North Stars. In October of that season, so they missed.
Who did they trade that pick for?
I know that George Ferguson went to Minnesota with the pick, and I can't remember who they got back, but
let me look it up.
Yeah, it's safe to assume that it was not
no, not
Denny
a good
Savard
trade.
or.
That's a Mike Milbury trade. I'll tell you that. Let me look. He was traded along with the round one pick that became Brian Lawton, so he didn't miss much there. For Anders Hackinson, Ron Megan, and another first round pick that eventually became Bob Airey. So not a particularly great trade. Would you agree with that?
I would agree, although Bob Airey, was really an important and somewhat, maybe unheralded piece in the Penguins' two Stanley Cups. Great third liner. Right? He could put them up for sure. He was a little bit of a smaller guy, not your big Bob Probert type, but he was an extremely effective defensive player. Great on face-offs. He had been through the wars of the 80s with the Penguins and really brought a ton of experience to those Cup teams. The other interesting name there was Anders Hackinson, who the Penguins ended up trading to Los Angeles for none other than Kevin Stevens.
Oh, wow. Really? Yeah. I just saw that. Wow. Yeah. Okay, so in a circuitous way, it kind of worked. Talk
about a backdoor success there. We're grasping for positives in this story of them having traded that first round pick away. But hey, they're there, and back to Baz. He engineered these trades, and it really didn't serve the franchise in the long term. So my feelings on Baz are a little mixed. I understand the situation he was in, but some of those trades were just horrendous. Just to add too, while we're talking GMs and longevity, I think the main guy who might challenge Patrick for the GM title is Eddie Johnston.
Really?
Eddie Johnston, who came to the Penguins in the summer of 1980 as their head coach, and somewhat like Red Kelly did, brought an enthusiasm, brought experience, brought I would say a craftiness to the Penguins. He was the longtime goaltender for the Boston Bruins, and he had won a couple Stanley Cups with the Bruins in the early '70s on those Bobby Orr teams. So he just brought a ton of experience and craftiness. And a good example of his craftiness was while he was in Boston, he had befriended the coach of the Boston Celtics, a guy named, I think his name was Bobby Heinsohn. Tom, yeah, thank you. He learned from him the art of the pick play as used in basketball, and he applied that to the Penguins' power play from the day he got there. And the result was that in the early 80s, the Penguins, I think it was the 80-81 season, the Penguins actually set the NHL record for most power play goals at that time.
Yeah, so now we're at the part of the story where the franchise savior enters the fold, a guy who originally did not want to be there. When he was drafted, he did not put the jersey on, but he did later on, and holy cow, did it work. Can you tell us about Mario Lemieux?
For sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. At the draft in 1984 at the Montreal Forum, under the advice of his team of agents, did not go down to the table when his name was called by Eddie Johnston, didn't put the sweater on. You hear different stories about why that happened. A lot of the consensus I gathered in writing the book, talking to people who covered the team at that time, it was largely a negotiating ploy. To me, it was a little too overt, heavy-handed ploy. And in subsequent years, Mario said that I believe he said that he regretted that. And within, I think, about 10 days, he was down in Pittsburgh with the jersey on and the contract signed and all of that. So they had been negotiating for a number of weeks up to that draft. And it just hadn't been worked out, and that's how it played out. It wasn't much fun for Penguins fans to see at the time, but he puts the sweater on, everything's forgotten, and boom, he's off to the races. I'm not sure if you've seen the tape of his first NHL goal in Boston Garden. Well, I'd really recommend looking it up on YouTube because it's actually one of his prettiest goals of his career.
Let me look it up now. I can do it now. Why not?
Yeah,
right,
why not?
See. I'm typing it in now. That was nice. A little backhand deke there. Okay.
Yep.
With a diving defenseman. Peters. Okay.
And to add a little extra to that, that defenseman is none other than Ray Bourque.
Really? That flying defenseman. That's Ray Bourque.
Yeah, he knocks the puck past Bourque at the blue line and breaks out and puts that fabulous deke on Pete Peters. And really, I mean, that's the beginning of his career. That is his first NHL shift. Scores on his first shot, and it's not some deflection off his butt into the net.
That's a good goal. I like that goal. You can go a little further into Lemieux if you want to. I know you're itching to. If I know Penguins fans, they can't stop themselves from talking about Lemieux. You can go into him a little more. It's okay.
I really can't. I mean, what can you say? As a Penguins fan, the team probably wouldn't be there if it wasn't for him. So, anyway, I'll try to keep it short. But he scores 100 points in his first year, wins the Rookie of the Year. There is some criticism of Lemieux in his first few seasons, and that people think that maybe he's not trying as hard as he could. He's getting by on his talent. He's floating a bit. Of course, he's still putting up incredible numbers. I think he scored 141 points in his second year. But it was the 1987 Canada Cup that really altered the course of Mario's career and helped him take his game to the next level. He was playing alongside with Wayne Gretzky and Paul Coffey and Ray Bourque and all these guys who had just had incredible success and won Stanley Cups. And he learned from them in 1987. He took that back to the NHL, and in 1988-89 he scored 199 points, one short of that magical 200 mark. But that was his career high for points. And 2 years later, they finally put the pieces in place around him to really form a championship club, and he wins his 2 Stanley Cups.
Yeah, no question about that. I was actually just about to ask about that 90-91 team. What can you tell us about it?
Well, it's interesting because Lemieux didn't play in that season until late January. He was out of the lineup with back problems. He came back. He got 3 points in his first game. It was in Quebec City, the team had fared well. They had a line that was called the option line that put up great numbers and kept the team near the top of the Patrick Division standings until Lemieux came back. But it wasn't smooth sailing. They did end up winning the division, but they were floundering a little bit towards the end of February that year. And Craig Patrick pulled off the biggest trade in Penguins history when he acquired Ron Francis and Ulf Samuelsson. Primarily, Grant Jennings was in there too, in a trade with the Hartford Whalers. And that trade really put the Penguins over the top. They won the Patrick Division Championship. They survived a extremely close 7-game series with New Jersey in the first round, beat Washington, and then they faced Boston in the semifinals. And that was really, you're wondering, well, are they finally going to be able to get past the big bad Bruins, a team that they had virtually no success against in their whole franchise history. I think they'd won maybe 3 or 4 games in the Boston Garden, literally, in their entire existence. They would go down 2-0 in that series. It's not looking great. Kevin Stevens issues his famous guarantee that they're going to come back and beat the Bruins, and they win the next 4 games against the Bruins and take them out. And they go up against the Minnesota North Stars, who were on a Cinderella run. The North Stars had finished 16th in the league that year, barely made it into the playoffs in the weakest division, the Norris division at the time, and just lit it up in the playoffs. They knocked off, along the way, the defending Stanley Cup champion Edmonton Oilers, made it to the final. They take Game 1 in Pittsburgh of the final, and anything could happen. Even with the Penguins having Lemieux and Francis and Yager. Yager was in his rookie year that year. The Penguins lose the first game of that series. They were actually down 2-1, having to go into Minnesota to tie things up at 2. And throughout that Cinderella run, the Met Center in Minnesota was described as the loudest rink many people had ever heard. Incredibly tough place to get a win in. They do it. They win the next 2 games. The final game is an 8-0 bombing in Minnesota, and the Penguins win their first cup.
Talking to Greg Enright, the author of the Pittsburgh Penguins, the first 25 years. So one Stanley Cup wasn't enough for them. They decided to repeat. Would you be able to describe the 1991-92 Penguins?
Yeah, for sure. Not your typical repeat title. A lot of teams, they'll repeat because they won it once and they're the best team in the league and they just keep rolling. What happens with the Penguins? About a month, 5 weeks before the season's about to start, their coach, Badger Bob Johnson, is hospitalized with a brain aneurysm. And, it's an incredibly dire prognosis. They appoint Scotty Bowman, who was in the organization, as the interim head coach. A completely different coaching style than Badger Bob, much more strict, much more disciplinarian, gruff. The Penguins, they try to keep going, but it's a real slog. Badger Bob ends up dying at the end of November of that year. It just has a huge negative effect on the team. And I think by March of that year, they were actually in danger of missing the playoffs. Again, Craig Patrick engineers another trade, a blockbuster trade that brings in Rick Tocchet and Shel Samuelson. And again, this rejuvenates the team, much like the trade that the previous year had done. And the Penguins really find their wheels. And even though they finished third in the Patrick division that year, they they're battle tested. They've been there before, and they go on another run. They do so without the services of Mario Lemieux, who is slashed by Adam Graves of the New York Rangers in the second round, and is knocked out. And they have to come back and beat the Rangers, who were not that far away from winning their own Stanley Cup in '94. They were, I think they had finished first overall that year. The Penguins came back and beat them in 6 games. And from there, I really think that the Penguins of that era reached their peak in the next 2 rounds. They went into Boston for the second year in a row, and this time it wasn't a matter of can we beat them. It's how much are we going to beat them by? They just manhandled the Bruins. They swept them 4 straight. They go up against the Chicago Blackhawks in the finals, who only came into the series having won their past 11 games and setting an NHL record for longest playoff winning streak, which is pretty intimidating. And the Penguins sweep them, and in the process win their 11th straight game to tie Chicago's just set record. It's an incredible story, and the winning one for the Badgers team was just really put a bow on what ended up being a storybook repeat season for the Pens.
All right, Greg, I'll get you out on this. Obviously, in case you couldn't tell, I'm an Islanders fan. What's your favorite moment in their rivalry?
Well, when we finally beat you guys in the playoffs a few years ago.
Yeah, I that was the lockout year. Lockout year when the Islanders snuck into the playoffs, and I remember exactly where I was when the Islanders got eliminated. It was I think it was Letang that scored the goal that ultimately eliminated the Islanders. I said, "Oh, sugar honey iced tea." I threw the remote across my house. My mom was on the phone with her brother, and she had to hang up to console me. I was really ticked off.
Well, hey, go ahead. Think how I felt in '93.
Well, how about last year when we swept you?
Yeah, well, there you go. You see, the misery. There's fresh chapters all the time.
My favorite moment, for whatever it's worth, is the Penguins-Islanders brawl. I was actually there. Were you watching that game?
Now, what year was this?
That was 2011. It was the game where Brent Johnson fought Michael Haley, and Eric Goddard came off the bench to fight Haley. There were like a million fights in that game, and the Islanders blew the Penguins out. Were you watching that game? Do you remember it? Because I was there.
Well, I don't remember it as well as the David Volek goal, but it is ringing a bell. But yeah. No, it's been, it's been an amazing rivalry. And, the series that they play, maybe not the last one that was this week, but I mean, just tooth and nail, great hockey. Wait.
Don't sell you guys short. Last year was a very competitive series. A lot of those games could have gone either way. Don't sell yourself short.
Okay. Well, you're right. You're right. There's that silver lining, I guess. But yeah, no, it's been a great rivalry, and I will add though that despite all the losses, the Penguins are leading in Stanley Cups.
Screw you. All right, Greg, you're the best. Thank you for your time.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks a lot, Jacob.
All right, that was Greg Enright. His book is The Pittsburgh Penguins, the First 25 Years. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro.
Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. tomorrow, you're going to get an exclusive interview that I'm going to do with Tom Van Riper. He wrote a book called New York Loves Them, Cooperstown Snubs Them, Great Mets and Yankees Who Belong in the Hall of Fame. I don't know if it's going to be as long as the Enright interview. You know what it is? I'm really passionate about sports, obviously. These people are passionate about sports. And, you know, when you put two passionate sports fans in a room together, they're going to go on and on and on and on and on. The only thing that's going to stop us is one of us needing the bathroom. And even then, we'd wait. I hope you like these long interviews. I certainly love listening back to them and learning more about these topics. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying that the best part of playing first base was that all I had to do was catch balls instead of throw them. I don't care for throwing that much.